Good afternoon. Today we're doing mission 1b from Unit 3A, solving equations. We're solving one-step equations. We're going to review all of the inverse operations, review adding and subtracting with the equations, and then focus on multiplying and dividing today. So first, our operation is subtracting 9, so the inverse or the opposite to undo that operation, the opposite of adding 9 would be subtracting 9. The opposite or the inverse of multiplying by negative 3 would be dividing by negative 3. The opposite or the inverse of adding 16 would be subtracting 16. Oops, I made a mistake way back here on this first one. It said subtracting, and so the opposite of that would be adding 9. I made a mistake there. Alright, this last one, the opposite of dividing by negative 9 would be multiplying by negative 9. So the negative doesn't change, it's the operation that's changing. Okay? We'll get to that in a little bit. Same thing here. It's the operation is multiplying, the opposite is divide. This is staying the same. Okay? Alright, quick review of adding and subtracting with equations. I have our variable on the left, so I need all of my numbers on the right. So I need to move this positive 10. The inverse of adding 10 would be subtracting 10. Subtracting 10. So those eliminate, and we have n equals, now there's more negatives, 4 minus 10. Remember our rule, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. These are different signs, we're really subtracting. Bigger number minus a smaller number, so 10 minus 4 is 6. So there's our answer. We could double check it by plugging it back in. Does negative 6 plus 10 equal 4? We just plugged it back in. Yes, it does. The second one, we have our variable on the right, so we need our numbers on the left. So we need to get rid of this negative 4. The opposite of subtracting is adding, so we're adding 4 to both sides. So those eliminate, and we get C equals 24. So there's our answer. So we practiced that the other day. Now down below we're going to practice solving a multiplication or division equation. So first, just like before, I'm going to draw my line down. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, just like lifting weights. When we have a letter next to a number, this is multiplication. It really looks like you want to add 3. No, no, no. Do not add 3. This is multiply. The opposite is divide. So we have to divide on both sides. By what number? Well, we have to divide by negative 3 because that's what number is multiplied by x. So negative 3 over negative 3. 3 divided by 3 is just 1x, or just x. And now we have 45 divided by negative 3. You can use a calculator on this unit. If you want to plug that in, you can. However, we also know that this is going to be a negative answer. Happy and grumpy, they don't get along. You should get an answer of 15 if you plug that in your calculator. So if you want to check to make sure if you got this right, our original equation was negative 3x equals 45. So you could plug in x here is a negative 15. It's multiplied because they're touching. A negative times a negative does equal a positive, and 3 times 15 is 45. So that is correct. Let's take a look at this next one. We have our letter over here, our variable, so we need all of the numbers on the other side. So our operation is really dividing. If we read this, it says t divided by negative 4. So this looks like minus 4. It's really not. If we had t minus 4, it would look like that, and we don't have that. So the opposite of dividing is multiply, so I'm going to multiply on both sides. And I always put, when we multiply, the number on the top because it's really, if we wanted to make this a fraction, so they're both at fractions, it's really on the top part of our fraction. So when we multiply by negative 4, this is really on the top and the bottom of our fraction, just like over here, they eliminated. 4 over 4 is just 1, so we have t all by itself. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive. 8 times 4 is 32. If you have questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, you can use a calculator. All right, next. Be careful. We have two things that are touching here. If they're touching, we know that's multiplied. So right away, I don't need to do anything with that negative. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. We're dividing by this whole number, negative 11. Dividing by negative 11. So 11 over 11 is just 1. So we have t left over. Two grumpy numbers get along. Those are really positives. 11 times what is 121? Well, 11 times 11 is 121. You can plug that in your calculator to divide. Let's flip over to the back side and try a couple more. Draw your line. Whatever you do to one side, we do to the other. So this says h divided by 7. So the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we need to multiply by 7 on both sides. Remember, it goes on the top if it's a fraction, because 7 over 7 eliminates and makes just one h or h. And then we know this is going to be a negative. Happy and grumpy, they don't get along. So we just need to plug this in our calculator. Most of us don't know 15 times 7 in our head. So if we plug it in, we get 105. Well, let's do two more. Be careful. Again, these are touching. It's multiply. The opposite of multiply is divide. So I'm going to draw my line right there. We use the line to do divide instead of this symbol quite often when we solve equations. So just so you know, we don't use this very often when we solve equations. So now we have, where opposite of multiplying is dividing, we have to divide by this whole number, and that whole number is a negative 2.5 divided by negative 2.5. So those eliminate. I know my answer is going to be a negative because it's a happy and a grumpy. They don't get along. This is one, again, I would plug in my calculator. 20 divided by a negative 2.5. 20 divided by 2.5 gives us a nice negative 8. All right, next one. I know these couple didn't show up super great on your notes. We have the variable on the right, and we need our numbers on the left because we have the letter D right here. The opposite of dividing by 5 is going to be multiplying by 5. Multiply by 5. So on the top and the bottom, those eliminate. And we have D. I know my answer is going to be a negative. If you want, you can do 5 times 3 and then 5 times 0.4. Or just plug it in your calculator. 5 times negative 3.4. And we get a nice 17, negative 17. It won't always be a nice number. Sometimes we may get a decimal. These last two, I would like for you to try on your own, and then click play and see if you got them right. This first one, we have our variable on the left, so we need our number on the right. The opposite of dividing by 7 is multiplying by 7. 7 over 7 is just 1, so we have A, 1A. And 7 times 4, you should know this one, is 28. If you're not sure, plug it back in. Is 28, oopsies, is 28 over 7 going to give you 4? You can plug it back in to double check. Last one, we have these two touching, that's multiply, so right away I know the opposite is going to be dividing. So we're dividing by 22. Those eliminate. We have our variable on the right, so our number, 88 divided by 22, well, you can kind of see 2 times what gives us 8, 2 times what gives us 8, should be a nice 4. All right, now we practiced multiplying and dividing with one-step equations. So right here, you have your homework, one-step equations with multiplying and dividing. There is an answer bank down at the bottom to make sure you're getting things correct. And there are a few on the back as well. There's a review of order of operations and a review of adding and subtracting.